Today, I wanted to share something with you a little bit different. It's something that when I first saw it, it really helped me to understand culture better, especially looking at Korean culture compared to my culture, home country's culture, or even the culture of other countries. Okay, so I call this a systematic approach to understanding culture. Okay, so we're often asked the question, what is culture? Okay, if we think about it in terms of pictures, Korean culture, we may get something like this. What is Korean culture? It is traditional buildings, it is hanbok, sport, food, pop culture, new trends or things in Korea. Same thing if I asked about Canadian culture, I could tell you about sport, our animals, our diversity, food, little other things. Okay. Now, with culture, if we look at a definition of culture, we would probably get something like this. Culture is the characteristics and knowledge of a particular group of people, encompassing language, religion, cuisine, social habits, music, and arts. Okay. If you look at any one of these, the way of life, especially the general customs and beliefs of a particular group of people at a particular time. So if I ask people to think about what is culture, they would probably come up with a textbook answer like one of these. And we would probably see a lot of repetition, being language, arts, food, and within a certain group. Okay, but to me, does this really help you or myself understand culture better? No, especially in comparison to other countries. It really doesn't help us a lot, I believe. Okay, so I wanted to think about what if we could look at culture in a more systematically. What things could we use to measure culture, and through measuring culture, use it to predict behavior? Okay, so it becomes a little bit more complex, but there's this one man who he made this his life work, Gert Hofstede. He was from the Netherlands, born in 1928, and he was a prominent European social scientist. And he spent his life dedicated towards learning about culture and being able to compare culture from countries and developing this framework that people could use. Okay, he worked for IBM, so he had a little bit of power and money behind him and funding him for these studies, because what IBM wanted was they wanted to be able to look at the different countries they're doing business in, look at the culture, and then be able to predict how it was best to do business with those countries based on it. So they initially interviewed over 100,000 people in 40 different countries that worked for IBM. So it was very business centric, but it was also very useful. Okay. Hofstede thought that culture is the collective programming of the mind, which distinguishes the members of one group from another. So I think that programming is important. We're programmed from the culture, that group's culture that we are in, and we learn the culture through that group by association. Okay, and each group can be different through the association of the culture of their particular group. Okay, obviously there's some critiques to this. One being, as I mentioned, very business centered, and it's national culture, not individual. So we're missing the different cultures within the groups within a country, especially when you're looking at very diverse countries like mine, Canada. There can be so many different cultures within that one culture, but somewhere like Korea, it might be easier to look at it more holistically. And the last one is culture is changing. Of course, it's always changing. So what Hofstede was able to come up with is a group of 6 dimensions. And with each of these dimensions, you could compare or put a country at a level from high to low, being 0 to 100. So if we looked at the first one at the top in the yellow power distance, a low power distance score, 0, or a high power distance score upwards near 100. Okay, so depending on where they were, we'd be able to see what the culture of that country was in terms of power distance, and we could look at these 5 other cultural dimensions. So I will talk about each and then I'll apply it to Korea, and then maybe provide a quick tip about each one. Okay, so let's look at Hostede's 6 cultural dimensions. The first one is power distance index. So if you think about power index in terms of culture, what are you thinking about? Okay, so let's see. Power distance, or PDI, this refers to the degree of inequality that exists and how people accept that inequality between people with and without power. Do they accept that very easily, or do they fight against inequalities? Okay, a high PDI score indicates that society accepts unequal situations, hierarchy, and distribution of power, and that people understand their place in kind of a system. Okay, we can imagine a caste system in India where people might accept that system very well. A low PDI score means that power is shared and is widely dispersed over the larger group. Society members do not accept situations where power is distributed unequally. They do not accept it, or maybe they fight against it more. Okay, so individualism versus collectivism is our next one. Okay, so we'll look at them all before looking at how they apply in Korea. So if we look at collectivism, individuality, okay, this dimension relates to the extent in which people in a society are integrated into groups and the strength of the tie or the relationship of that group within the community. A high or individualistic score indicates weak connections for people that are not in your family close-knit group. People take less responsibility for others' actions and their outcomes of those actions. In collectivist societies, people are supposed to be loyal to their group, which they belong, and in exchange, that group will defend and fight for their interests. The group itself is often normally larger, and people will take responsibility for others' well-being. So next one is masculinity versus femininity. So in masculine societies, people will be driven by competition, achievement, and success. Success is defined by like winner takes all, or best in the field, the MVP, things like this. This is a value system that starts in school and continues even throughout life in later years in employment and things. Demonstrating your success and being strong, fast, are positive characteristics in these societies. Money and achievement are important. However, in contrast, feminine societies, there's a greater importance placed on relationships, cooperation, and caring for others. A feminine society is one where quality of life is a sign of success. Modesty is perceived as a strong or great virtue. So next is uncertainty avoidance. We can again go from low to high on this. Okay, this dimension has to do with the way society deals with facts, the fact that the future can be unknown. Should they try to control the future, or should they just let it happen? Okay, ambiguity brings anxiety, and different cultures will deal with that anxiety differently. In societies that score high, people attempt to make life as predictable and controllable as possible. People in low uncertainty avoidance countries, they're more relaxed, open about what will happen. Next, we have long-term versus short-term orientation. Okay, so this dimension was originally described as pragmatic versus normative. It refers to the time horizon people in a society display. Normative societies, or short-term, low-scoring, prefer to maintain time-honored traditions and norms while viewing societal change with suspicion. Okay, those cultures that score high long-term orientation take a pragmatic approach, and they do things often quickly and thriftily, and they make a lot of effort through things such as education as a way to prepare for the future. I think an important note that I probably should have mentioned, that whether they score low or high, it's not necessarily meaning high is better than low. It's just two ends of the spectrum. Okay. Next is indulgence versus restraint. Okay. This dimension is defined as the extent to which people try to control their desires and their impulses. This is based on the way they were raised. Relatively weak control is called indulgence, where relatively strong control is called restraint. More indulgent countries encourage relatively free gratification of people's own drives and emotions, such as enjoying your life and having fun. Okay, not so much of that you only live once kind of motto. More restraint societies, or more of that, more restraint societies have more emphasis on suppressing gratification, more regulation of people's conduct and behavior, and very strict social norms. So here, less of the you only live once model. Okay, so looking at Korea in these 6 dimensions: power distance, individual collectivism, masculinity, femininity, uncertainty, avoidance, long or short-term orientation, indulgence, and restraint. Where would Korea fall in each of these? Let's look. So here we can see, and this is the actual country comparison tool from their web page, and it's called Hostede Insight. So you can find it there, and you can type in any country. Here I typed in Korea, obviously, for this, but I could also add in a comparison country. And when I do that, it will show me the 2 countries side by side. So this is very useful for me when I want to compare maybe my home country to Korea, or Korea to another country. Here we can see Canada versus South Korea, and we can see right away that there are some differences. And the web page will actually give me kind of a breakdown of each country and what maybe the differences are. So it can be very useful in helping you to understand the differences. But for now, I'm just going to talk about Korea and where they score. And I hope what you will do is look at this tool and compare your country to Korea. And I think it will be very insightful for you. Okay, so we got Korea scoring a 60 on this, and this is somewhat of an intermediate score, has a slightly hierarchy society. This means people accept the hierarchy order, and everyone has a place in that, and it doesn't need any justification. Hierarchy in the organization is seen as reflecting in inherent inequalities. There's going to be inequalities. Centralization is popular, and people expect to be told what to do by their superiors. So you often see people waiting to be told, as opposed to going out, being go-getters and doing things on their own. The boss is a benevolent autocrat. So although they have kind of like full control or absolute power, they make their decisions with their employees' well-being in mind. So they're taking into consideration their employees, but when it comes down to it, they do have complete control. Okay. So here's my tips for power distance with Korea. You need to expect centralization, and you need to understand that hierarchies are an inherent part of Korean culture. Orders come from the top by way of an official paper from a centralized office, or just from the top, the principal or the CEO or the head of whoever this is. This can be slow in the answering process because the person you are inquiring to, your superior, may need to inquire to their superior. Even if they know what the answer is, they may need to go to their superior just to have approval before they can answer your question. Okay, so this can really slow things down. Don't always expect that you can give your input, even in the decisions made around you. Okay, these are made by the superiors, and you're expected to mostly follow them. Okay, acknowledge the hierarchies. People expect to be called by their titles. Even in casual relationships, you can see titles like hyung, hyungnim, oppa, sajangnim. These are commonly used. Okay? Next, we have individualism versus collectivistic. Okay, here South Korea has a score of 18, so very low, and it's considered a very collectivistic society. This manifests in the close long-term commitment to the member group, whether it's the family, the extended family, the graduating class in high school, the graduating class in university, a group connection. Loyalty is paramount, is very important, and overrides most other societal rules and regulations. So they will break rules for each other if it means being loyal to their group. The society fosters strong relationships where everyone takes responsibility for the members of the group. So everyone is trying to help the group. In collectivist societies, offense leads to shame and loss of face. Employer-employee relationships are perceived in moral terms like a family link. Hiring, promotions, decisions take account to the employee's in-group, etc. Okay. In 18, let's look at Korea. Some tips for this. Again, they're very collectivist. It can be difficult to make friends without a group connection because you're not part of that collectivistic group. Join a group with a common interest and you may find yourself in some inner social circles. This is where I find I have been able to meet my closest Korean friends is through group connections. Expect close group relationships, whether family, graduating class, fellow employees, or whomever. Loyalty in the group is paramount, and this will override the other societal rules and regulations. You need to expect this. Society will foster the strong relationship where everyone takes responsibilities for other members. If someone offends or creates an offense, that can lead to shame and loss of face, which is very apparent in Korean society. We need to not point out the differences or break from the group because we will lose face or cause maybe others to lose face. We should also avoid giving negative feedback, and that even goes to our students. We can see how negative feedback is very different in Korea, where we would look at it as more of constructive criticism in the West. Okay. Next, we have masculinity, femininity. South Korea is a 39, so it's a slightly feminine society. They work in order to live. Managers strive for consensus. People want equality, solidarity, and equality in their working life. Okay. Conflicts are resolved by compromise, negotiation. Okay. Focuses on well-being and status is often not shown. An effective manager is a supportive one, and the decision making can sometimes be made through involvement, although I think the hierarchy power distance would trump that in this situation. Okay, 39, Korea being slightly feminine. Principals, although having a lot of power, often strive for the consensus of the larger group. Even if the situation may seem unjust to you, think about the larger picture. Keep in mind the proverb, it is better to have harmony than justice. Okay, so even though something may be right, if that upsets the larger group, they might not do it or try to bring that person to justice to keep the harmony within the group. And that can be very frustrating when you see something obviously is wrong, but people don't want to do anything because they don't want to upset the harmony. Conflicts, expect them to be resolved by compromise and negotiation. Don't try to have a winner and loser in your conflicts, and don't try to point out who is at fault. Okay. Next, we have uncertainty avoidance, and Korea at 85 is one of the most highest uncertainty avoiding countries in the world. They will have rigid codes of belief and behavior, and they're intolerant to unorthodox behavior and ideas. No offense to us, but we are about as unorthodox as anything in Korea, so they can be suspicious or often even intolerant of us. Okay. Innovation can be stifled because of this. So can creativity. There can be some other issues. Okay, 85 is the score for Korea. Some tips for this: expect the rigid codes of belief and behavior. There is a need for rules, even if the rules seem to not work or sometimes aren't even applied. Okay, many of the rules may even be unspoken ones. Koreans can be very suspicious of intolerant or unorthodox behavior and ideas, so keep in mind of that. And people have an inner urge to be busy and work hard. Precision and punctuality are the norm. Always show up early. Long-term orientation, Korea has a 100 score on this, very surprising. South Korea scores as one of the most pragmatic, if not the most pragmatic, long-term orientated society. People live their lives guided by virtues and practical good examples. This is even taught in the school system, what a good Korean citizen is. Korean generally makes great efforts to prepare for the future, and you can see this especially in the education system that is so demanding on high school and then into the university exam. So demanding. This is in preparation for the future, not only for that individual, but for the country as a whole. 100. So the long-term orientation, some tips. Koreans value education because it is seen as a way to control the future. They will expect you to do the same also. You'll hear more questions starting with how or what, then with why. They are asking you to see if something is true or if it's a fact rather than why it is. Okay? People live their lives guided by virtues and practical good examples. Expect comparisons to good examples in the past. Maybe the past teacher, past employee was a really good employee. So you may get comparisons there. Okay, now we have individualism. In this one, Korea scores a low score of 29, meaning they're a very restrained society. Okay, they have a tendency towards cynicism and pessimism. Restrained societies do not put emphasis on leisure time and try to control the gratification of their desires. And when they actually, fulfill their desires, they can even feel that it is somewhat wrong. Okay, 29 in this one. Learn about the Korean term Han, to help you understand the cynicism and pessimism you may encounter. It's a bit complicated, but it's also very interesting. And I think this is something that you can really find interesting when you can find some information about it. It's difficult. Expect little to no emphasis on leisure time. Koreans control the gratification of their desires. These desires are restrained by the social norms, and people can feel being indulgent is somewhat wrong. Avoid appearing to be overindulgent. And in this sense, you even need to be sensitive in things like asking for your vacation time, because they might view that as being indulgent. Even though you're entitled to that, they will kind of tiptoe around it a little bit more than we will, so they don't appear to be as indulgent or selfless. Okay. So here we can see South Korea and overall the power distance 60, individualism 18, masculinity 39, uncertainty avoidance 85, long-term orientation 100, and indulgence 29. Okay, so you can look at the couple pages that I took a lot of that material from, and maybe if you can do those country comparison tools and look at Korea versus yourself, your own country, I think it would be very helpful for you. And yeah, I mean, this is more of a tool for us learning, but it could be applied in the classrooms with higher level students. I do it with the native English teacher training and also with the Korean English teachers when I'm prepping them to go overseas. So hopefully you found this useful, and I'd love to hear your thoughts and ideas about this too, and any examples that you have, as I find it very interesting.